Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turn Zero Loss, hosted by the Magic Engineers. Today, we are going to be discussing a deck tech for Zada Hedron Grinder. Zada Hedron Grinder is a Goblin ally, 3/3 legendary creature. It costs 3 and a red. And it reads, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada Hedron Grinder, copy that spell for each other creature you control that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. Pretty good card. I like it. One of the things that this deck seeks out to do is to flood the board with goblins and cast single target spells targeting only Zada to pump the entire board and kind of go in for a aggro Swain win. So it's a really aggressive deck, seeks to smack face really hard and try to make everyone really big. So some of the ways that we could do that is with lots of lords. So we got things like Goblin King that lets people get +1/+1 and also have Mountain Walk. Good way to be able to continuously find the goblins that we need is things like Goblin Matron or Goblin Recruiter, so we can fetch those cards up whenever necessary. Each one has its own utility, of course, with Goblin Matron only being able to find a single goblin, and Goblin Recruiter being able to find all the goblins in your deck and kind of stack the order as however you need. Then we have both of the Krenkos, so Krenko Mob Boss and Krenko 10 Street Kingpin, in there to produce a bunch of goblin tokens to up the goblin count, kind of up the creature count as well for when we're trying to copy all of our spells. And then there's a couple things to kind of keep the board a little bit clear, so things like Goblin Trash Master or even a couple removal spells in there as well to keep the board at least mostly empty to allow us to get through for easier swings. Muxus is probably the most relevant goblin in this deck, though he's not the commander. But Muxus helps us get goblins off the top of our deck, as well as pumps himself up for a pretty big hit. So, the big way for this deck to be able to accomplish what it needs to get done is that we have a lot of combat tricks and cantrips that are relatively inexpensive, leading to high storm counts out of nowhere and try to storm off for a win. The deck accelerates very quickly to be able to outpace most mid-range or control decks. So the way that we're able to do that is a couple combat tricks, like Brute Force, gives everything +3/+3. Run Amok, +3/+3 in Trample. Stolen Vitality, +3 and +1 in Trample. One of the better ones, Downhill Charge, +X/+O, which can be free if we sack a mountain, and X is going to be the number of mountains we control as we cast a spell. And then one of my favorite cards in the deck is Fist of Flames, where if you have a really wide board and you cast this targeting Zada, you draw a card for each copy of it, and then as you go through the stack, each goblin that's targeted progressively gets more and more big because they get +1/+1 for each card drawn. So basically, you stack it up, and each one isn't going to get bigger as you draw more cards. It just gets bigger based on the amount of cards you've drawn up to that point. So Zada's going to be the biggest of them all, but everything before it is kind of like sequentially bigger. Other good ways to finish the game in this deck is I have a couple combos in here, but things that can really impact the board as well. So there's the Heat Shimmer Twin Flame, so you can cast that targeting Zada, make your entire board doubled, and usually that should be enough to get through. But if that's not enough to get through, you could also hit it with a Dualcaster Mage and win the game that way by infinitely copying Dualcaster Mage to win. Past in Flames is also a really good one because it gives all of your cards in your graveyard flashback, so it lets you bring them all back for the same amount that you cast them originally and do it all again. Warm Store Surge and Impact Tremors, also a really notable set of cards, allowing each of the creature tokens that we make or any of the goblins that we cast to deal damage as they enter the battlefield. And then if there's something locking us out of attacking somebody, usually we can make enough goblin tokens to hit them all with a goblin bombardment to be able to finish them off that way. The deck is able to accelerate pretty quickly. It's got a pretty low curve. Usually averages around 3 CMC. The upper end of the curve is about 6. So most of the stuff is around 1, 2, or 3. So it's really cheap stuff that can really accelerate fast. Some of the best ones to be able to cantrip off of this would be Crimson Wisps, which just makes your creatures all red, which they're already all red anyway, but you draw a card off of it. Fist of Flames, of course, and then Renegade Tactics makes it to where none of your creatures can block for that turn, but you're casting this during your own combat step, and you really don't care about that much. And then as for mana acceleration, there's not a whole lot of rocks in this. There's definitely a lack of those, but it's just more for the fact of I tried to shove as many goblins to this deck as I could, as well as trying to balance out with like some of the combat tricks and spell casting that's available here. But there's a couple of mana acceleration spells like Battle Hymn, which gives you red mana equal to the number of creatures that are on the battlefield. Brightstone Ritual, which gives you red mana equal to the number of goblins that are on the battlefield. Then there's Stormkiln Artist, which with all the spells that we are copying over and over throughout our entire board, is going to generate a ton of treasure tokens. And then there's Skirk Prospector, which turns those goblin tokens into mana. Pretty good stuff. It's a pretty average mana base, it's mono red, so we don't have to go anywhere special with anything. No, nothing fancy with any of the lands. Basically, mostly mountains. A couple things in there to kind of supplement the mountains. One of the biggest weaknesses of this deck is any static effects that can reduce the toughness of creatures by 1 or 2. This will wipe the board fairly quickly and kind of prevents us from committing to our massive board. Any stacks effects against attacks also slow the game down quite a bit for us, because with us not being able to ramp as fast as everyone else, anything that makes us pay to attack usually slows us down enough to kind of shut us down a little bit. This deck also needs some time to hit critical mass. While it can accelerate pretty quickly, a board wipe will kind of neuter us pretty quickly. Some of the notable upgrades that can be made to the deck list that is going to be included in the description are going to be Blood Moon to allow the Goblin King to be more effective with the Mountain Walk, a Goblin Wizard to kind of just be able to have a free goblin each turn as long as you have one in your hand, because you can just tap it and put a goblin into play. Grape Shot, because of those storm turns that I talked about earlier, where we're casting lots of spells, we need to be able to get a lot of damage out of nowhere. Conspicuous Snoop, because I do have a Kiki Jiki in there. You could combo with that, or any of the abilities that are in the deck itself, Conspicuous Snoop could use as well. And in general, I could probably add some more cantrips to increase the card draw. So yeah, hopefully you like the deck and you enjoy it enough to kind of give it a click, give it a listen, and look at the list, buy it if you want. I have it on Scryfall here, so it's all very priced out for you and everything. Give us a like, follow, subscribe, follow us on Twitter at Lost Turn, and yeah, have a great day.